everybody. It is such a thrill to be here at Trend Micro's CLOUDSEC, and an absolute honor. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. We are living in a time of absolutely massive changes to our society in general. We have so many different things happening simultaneously that it's almost impossible to keep up with everything that's going on. And we've got not just the fallout of COVID, which has really changed our lifestyles over the last couple of years, but it's had ongoing economic flow-ons that we're still dealing with. On top of that, we've got these crazy geopolitical situations that are happening and are interrupting our supply chains and are likely to continue to do so. And in the midst of this, of course, we have all of these cyber incidents that are happening, not just here, but all around the world. Cyber is, for the first time that I can remember, making headline news in Australia because of events surrounding Optus and other companies over the last couple of months. But it's not just here. Every single day, I hear about brand new cyber events all over the world. Last week in the US, there was an attack, a DDoS attack on 14 US airports that literally took out the websites of the airports. Luckily, it didn't impact air traffic control, and it didn't actually take out any of the airline websites, which would have been even more disastrous, and it didn't stop any air traffic. But you can just imagine the ramifications of what that kind of cyber attack would do. Now, today, I'm going to take you for a little bit of a ride into the future of emerging technologies, but also talk about some of the threats in the here and now. So where I'd like to start with is the rise of super hacks. And my gosh, we are definitely experiencing it here in Australia. Over the weekend, or Friday, you might have heard about an attack on Woolies with their online shopping, where 2.3 million Australians had information compromised. Still learning the details of that. This morning I was checking email and I saw that another online company called Vinovo had been attacked. I don't know exactly what's happened there yet. Again, last week, Medibank had noticed unusual IT activity affecting, they have, I think, about 3.7 million customers, and it looks like no customer data was breached, thank goodness. But the latest reports that I've heard this morning is that it looks like it was a ransomware attempt, and they shut it down, and I'll be talking a bit more about ransomware shortly. Another attack that happened about a week ago was involving the Australian Federal Police, and the attack actually happened in Colombia because the AFP, along with law enforcement officers and agencies from all around the world, have been involved in trying to stop drug cartels and smuggling, and this breach actually compromised, I think it was 25 active operations, tens of thousands of very sensitive documents. And look, this list just keeps going on and on and on. One that concerns me that you may not be aware of happened at Uber about a month ago now. And with this one, there was an Uber employee that was logging in but kept getting these push notifications to verify their credentials. And it just kept coming hour after hour, and then got a second notification through WhatsApp saying, look, you need to verify this so that you can continue to log in and we can confirm that it's you. But it wasn't actually the IT department. It was someone pretending to be the IT department. And this person thought, okay, this sounds legit, logged in, and it gave access to a hacker to all kinds of internal systems. And it's something called multi-factor authentication fatigue. It's just yet another new type of attack that we're starting to see, and these hackers are getting smarter and sneakier all the time. So I'd like to talk about ransomware for a moment. And, this is, again, really a new-ish threat vector that is impacting a lot of companies. What you may not realize is that not only are they trying to encrypt the data in your systems, but they're now going after your backup repositories as well. And even if you pay the ransom, 1/3 of the time, the hackers or whoever is responsible is not unlocking the data, and you don't even have access to your backup data. So if you take away one thing to take back to your company, and that is, remember, there's a new threat vector out there that's, being used all over the place right now. Have you ever heard of SneakerNet? Like physically detaching your backup systems from your computer systems? I think it's time to start thinking really carefully about how you store your backups as well. Another thing that's happening with ransomware that is a trend that started a few years ago are attacks on supply chains. So 2 of them I'll talk about right now. The first was last year with Colonial Pipeline in the US, where they attacked the billing system of Colonial Pipeline, and Colonial Pipeline made a decision to shut down its gas pipeline going all from the middle of, like the south part of the US all the way up the eastern seaboard. And that meant that gasoline, or petrol as we say here, stopped flowing along the eastern seaboard. Now, it turned out that they didn't actually attack the pipeline itself, but because they weren't able to bill for it, they decided to turn off the taps. Here in Australia in 2020, there were 2 separate attacks on Toll, which is one of the major transport companies and freight and logistics delivery companies, and both of these were ransomware attacks. And as soon as this was detected, Toll took actions and actually had people start using their personal devices so that they could try to keep operations happening as best as possible in the midst of something horrific. And normally you wouldn't have staff use internal devices, especially if they're at work. But in this case, they wanted to try to keep operations flowing, and they did the right thing. So we have 2 different kinds of approaches that companies took to these kinds of events. Identity theft is something that is absolutely front and center for many of us right now because of all the breaches that have been happening in Australia. And frankly, when I think about cybersecurity, one thing that I have been saying for many years now is the absolute worst thing that can happen to a person is to have their identity stolen, because this is a crime that just keeps giving. It impacts you for the rest of your life. And I actually was talking recently with a gentleman who was impacted by an ID theft at the office, or OPM, one of the US government agencies that hosts all the information for like the CIA and spies and cyber contractors. And I was corresponding with him a few weeks ago. He was caught up with this. His whole family was caught up in the information breach, and they are still fighting, even though this is a cybersecurity expert, to keep themselves safe. It is absolutely a crime that impacts people as an individual, but it also impacts a company's reputation. And we've seen the events unfold with Optus, and there's still so much that's not clear about exactly what's happened. Look, it's very hard to say right now whether it was a real hack, whether it was inadequate security, an insider job. the jury's still out. We don't have all the information, but we do know that it's had an impact on a very, very large portion of the Australian population. And identity protection is something that many of us in Australia are going to need to have as a lifetime resource and make sure that we're not compromised, because even if we call our banks and our credit card companies and everybody else that we are affiliated with financially, that doesn't stop someone from using that identification to open something else in your name that you have no idea of, unless you have alerts about your credit rating and your scores and all the rest. So this is something that really worries me, and I think it's going to get worse. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as I go into some of the other things future-wise. Another big trend that has emerged as a result of COVID, it's been happening for a long time, but it just super accelerated with COVID, is working from home. From a security perspective, what that means is that you now have a much wider security perimeter than you would have had in the past, and people are using personal devices on a routine basis, and they may or may not have the same kind of tight security that you'd have on a device that sits in a desktop inside your office, inside of a VPN, and inside of all of your firewalls and everything else. So this is a trend that I see continuing to happen. People are used to working from home, but there's also another trend that's coincident with this, is that as a result of COVID and all of the economic fallout, people are starting to move out of expensive places like capital cities into more regional areas because of affordability. And a lot of the jobs, when they say hybrid working, they're actually expecting people to be commuting, but there's a discontinuity here between, having to commute for a couple of hours to get somewhere and actually having flexible working. That's not really flexible working if you have to drive 2 hours each way, 3 days a week. So we need to start being cognizant to some of these bigger trends and take them back into our company. You might be in the cyber or IT area of your company, but you can be a leader and say, look, these are things that are important that we need to think about. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about social media. And, this has been a concern for quite some time about data collection and the stuff that people actually voluntarily put up about themselves online. So if you can imagine, you've got so much information, and most people, silly, put their birth date up there. A lot of people do. Hopefully they'll start becoming more aware and take it down. If any of you have your real birth date on a social media account, action for today, take it down. Date of birth is one of the key pieces of identity that you need to be able to do anything. But the other threat there is that all this information that you're putting out in social media is out there in the public, and there are companies that literally scrape the data and take data from there and from all kinds of places and mash it together into these gigantic repositories about information about individuals, and then use it for targeted social engineering attacks. And it is really dangerous. I was doing an interview, I pre-recorded it last week, I think it played yesterday morning for a Brisbane radio talk show. And one of the hosts has had her identity stolen on Facebook with fake accounts popping up all over the place that are asking people to enter their bank details to supposedly win one of the radio contests. And they're part of, a really big conglomerate, and they're working with Facebook to try to take them down. But as soon as they take down one fake account, another one pops up. And unfortunately, a lot of consumers have actually given these scammers their bank details and other information, thinking that they're entering a contest. So, with social media, it's really great in terms of meeting new people, doing business and contacts, but we need to be very careful about what we actually put up there that may be of a personal nature that can be used against us. And even as a business, in this case I've just described, social media can actually be used as a weapon. And it's something that most people are not aware of. Another thing that a lot of people are not aware of is how often companies are asking people to send really sensitive data in an unencrypted format over email. And it is just unbelievable. They're either asking you to send it or they're sending it back to you. And every time I get one of these emails or get one of these requests, I go absolutely cyber ballistic on them, I must admit. Healthcare is an area that is fraught with danger. Did you know that every time you get a prescription sent from your physician to a pharmacy, it's very likely, unless you say otherwise, that it's sent in an email, it's not encrypted, and it has your Medicare number at the very least, and possibly other information. The same thing with referral letters that your GP might send to a practitioner. It's not encrypted. There is absolutely no reason that the Australian government should not have a secure portal for medical professionals to be able to send this kind of information to each other in an encrypted format. It should not be sent in open text email. Insurance companies are another area where I've seen a lot of really sensitive data sent out to consumers by email, and it's not encrypted. And, yes, there are protocols that encrypt email while in transit, but not at rest when it's sitting on a computer or in between. And if someone has malware anywhere along the line on their computer, or that email somehow gets intercepted, guess what's intercepted? All of that confidential information. I've even had a security company send information to me that had, believe it or not, in plain text passwords. I couldn't believe it. I was just gobsmacked. And I've had government agencies who on their website say, do not send anything to us by email. It's not safe. Use our secure portal. Enter the information through the secure portal, and then they send me an email with a summary of the information that I send in plain text. Oh my gosh, crazy. One of the things that many of you may not be aware of that's happening right now is a practice for human resources onboarding. And a friend of mine recently was changing jobs and alerted me to this. And especially when you think about remote working or hybrid working, you may not be physically next to the company where you can literally drive over, but they want to do identity checks before they'll formalize your contract. And they actually required my friend, and I'm sure this is not just one company, this is a lot of them, to send all kinds of identity information like proof of birth certificates, driver's licenses, Australian citizenship papers, passports, utility bills, bank statements, more than what you would consider the 100 points of identification in order to secure a job. And my friend asked me, what do I do? And I said, tell them you want to send it to them in an encrypted format. That was not acceptable. There was no choice. Either you send it or you don't get the job. Wow. That's a time bomb waiting to go off. So, okay, now let's talk about some new technologies that are going to be really interesting and may help us in this whole world of privacy. One that I really like is augmented reality, and of course it has its sister virtual reality. So with augmented reality, what you have is laid on top of your world that you see, a digital world that's sort of superimposed. This has been available through glasses for quite some time, but just recently, Lenovo came out with its Think Reality A3 glasses that allow you to see an image like this, where literally you have 3 big virtual monitors in front of you and can interact with those monitors through gesture control, just like you might with a computer. What's really cool about this, especially if you're working in a remote environment, like let's say your house, and you're working with really sensitive data, is that the only person who's going to see that data is you, because you're the only one who's wearing those augmented reality glasses. So it's actually a really good way to have privacy and confidentiality of looking at big data and have a lot more monitor space than you would have at your normal desktop. And Lenovo isn't the only one doing this, but I really like this picture, so decided to describe it. And it's a commercial product, something that you can actually buy today. Another area that's really interesting in the world of augmented and virtual reality is smart contacts. How many of you have heard of smart contacts? Raise your hand. Okay, a couple. Smart contacts are really cool. There's 3 different ways that smart contacts will be used. They're contact lenses that you'll be able to pop in and out of your eyes, and there's 3 prongs. There's ICT, this sort of stuff that you would use on your smartphone. There's augmented reality, and eventually virtual reality, and there's biotech. Biotech is super, super interesting, and believe it or not, there are already contact lenses that have been FDA approved that will allow you to put them in your eyes and do drug delivery of antihistamines. There are other contact lenses that measure intraocular pressure to help detect early signs of glaucoma. There are contact lenses that you can use that will help treat corneal injuries, such as major burns, and help to resolve that. And the list goes on and on. In the ICT world, we haven't seen much yet, but in augmented reality, there's a company called Mojo Vision that has a product called Mojo Lens that's in late prototype. And let me show you a quick video about
Modern
this.
technology promises to keep us more connected. But in surrounding ourselves with screens and devices, it feels as though we've lost something. Imagine if we could replace our screens with something that informs without distraction. Could we see differently, more clearly? Could it help us find that invisible edge when we need it most? Or allow us to connect in crucial moments, providing vital information in an instant? Introducing Mojo Lens, the world's first augmented reality smart contact lens. Put Mojo Lens on in the morning, and throughout your day, you'll have access to timely information without losing focus on the world around you. Mojo Lens is designed not to bombard you with data, but to elevate your vision by providing the information you need exactly when it's needed, all while letting you look like yourself. When it's not in use, the technology just fades away. We call this concept invisible computing.
Mojo's invisible computing solution will be a platform that gives you everyday superpowers and an invisible edge throughout your day.
It's exactly right. Early adopters of these kinds of smart contacts will have superpowers compared to most people. That people looking at you won't know that you're wearing it, and you'll have access to all kinds of extra information like facial ID. If I were wearing smart contacts, I'd be able to look out at every one of you and pick up your names and social media profiles. And eventually what we're going to see is a convergence of the biotech side, the augmented reality side, and the ICT sort of smartphone side into single lenses that will give you multi-purpose functionality. And you'll have something like, an Apple Store or a Google Play Store where you'll download apps for your smart contacts, much the way we download different apps for our smartphones. Could it be hacked? Well, possibly, if security by design is not implemented. Now, luckily, this particular company, they actually have privacy policies and, talk about privacy by design. And, that's part of what they say is their philosophy. But this is something that you can expect to see over the coming 5 to 10 years being a reality in our environment. And it's exciting. Another newish concept that many of you have probably heard of is the Metaverse. How many of you have actually used virtual reality to go into the Metaverse? Okay, a couple people. So it's not just one Metaverse. People think of Facebook and Meta. It's not just them. There are a lot of different Metaverses. And one of the things that the Metaverse is designed to do is to give you this virtual immersion. And I think it can be used for some really interesting business cases, but it also has this digital world, like pretend world aspect to it as well. Do you know that there are companies that literally do nothing more than sell property in the virtual world? Can you imagine paying $1 million for a virtual house? Now, if I had an extra $1 million to invest, unless I was a billionaire, I think I'd rather buy a real house and have a tangible asset. And there are a lot of other things that you purchase in these metaverse digital worlds that actually have no intrinsic value other than what people think they are worth. However, if I think about what the business case might be, an immersive environment that allows you to interact really closely with people that are dispersed, that can be a really good use. Another really good use might be a product prototype where you want to have feedback from a mass audience of something that you're designing but haven't actually manufactured yet, and you let them play around with it and give you back ideas and feedback, and you tie it to a real-world product that eventually comes out and you sell. Another really good use will be delivering services in this kind of immersive environment. And I'm thinking, coaching, consulting, there's all kinds of real-world services that could benefit from this. But of course, we need to have proper security built in right at the fundamental level. One of the problems that I see right now is that the currency to get into a metaverse is crypto. And we know what's happened in the crypto world where values have just gone tanking. And I think that for the metaverse concept to be successful, we need to give people other payment options aside from crypto for this to become a reality. But it's something to keep your eye on from a security perspective. If I had just one technology that I would say would impact literally everybody in every business on the planet, it would be artificial intelligence. Now, when I talk about AI, I'm using it as a really, really big umbrella term. And it uses techniques like machine learning and deep learning to be able to gather big data sets. But we're talking about natural language processing, so voice recognition and speech translation. We're talking about chatbots and digital assistants, context awareness, big data analysis, heuristics, all sorts of really interesting stuff. And we have so many applications in so many vertical industries. AI started all the way back in the 1950s, but it's now starting to ramp up like this, and it's going to go skyrocketing because of quantum computing. Quantum computing is becoming a reality. So today's computers run on 0 and 1s, but with quantum computing, you're actually looking at particles, atomic particles, and the more states that you have or qubits that you have, the more simultaneous computations you can do. And that means that you can crunch data even faster and faster and faster. At Harvard last year, they invented a quantum computer that's capable of 256 qubits. That is more atoms than there are in our entire solar system. Can you picture that? Match that with AI and imagine what will happen with AI power going forward. Now, with AI, there's always good and bad, and one of the things to watch out for going out into the future is something called deep fakes. How many of you have heard of deep fakes? Yes, okay, I'm talking to a tech-savvy audience here. So a deep fake, for those of you who don't know, is where you have an image and a voice of someone that looks exactly like that person, but it isn't them. They're using AI software to trick you into thinking them. Now, one of the things that I think is a potential hack of the future, it hasn't happened yet to the best of my knowledge, is that, can you imagine you're doing a video conference with your team in your office and somebody hacks into that, and the next thing you know, you think you're talking to your CEO and you're in accounts payable. Everything looks real, sounds like your CEO. You talk to him or her all the time, and he says, do a funds transfer, and you do it. But it's not the CEO, it's somebody pretending to be them. That system has been hacked into. So who would be responsible? Would it be the person who was tricked? Would it be the video software vendor or service? Would it be the cyber criminal, someone else? Scarily, when I ask that question to regulators, they want to point to the person who's been tricked. I tend to think it's, the cyber criminal or perhaps lack of adequate security. Luckily, this hasn't happened yet, but it's something that I think we need to have on our radar. When it comes to AI, we need to remember that the way that AI learns today is through deep learning and machine learning, which involves taking in massive data sets, too much for any human to look at probably in their entire lifetime. And in those data sets are biases. And that means that the AI can start to go off in some really strange directions. We need to incorporate in our AI something called reinforcement learning so that we don't let the AI go astray and make decisions that are wrong or biased. Another area is in the area of robotics, where robots are being trained by humans in virtual reality who are literally using telepresence to control robots and teach them how to do things. There are researchers at Kindred AI who actually have this machine, which is called SWORD, in production, and it has actually picked out of warehouses over 500 million items as of a couple of weeks ago. Now, if something like that were to be hacked, of course, there could be disastrous results if a robot was hacked, but this is yet another way that AI is going to be used in conjunction with virtual reality. Smart cities, we're talking about deploying sensors all over the place, and this is good, but it can have both a positive side and a negative side. So let me share with you some of the positive things. An example is from Chicago, and they started back in probably about 2015, 2016 with a project called the Array of Things, which looks like this little beehive thing, and it has all kinds of sensors that they were deploying 500 of these throughout the city of Chicago to measure things like barometric pressure and ambient noise and pedestrian traffic and vehicular traffic and all sorts of things, and making it open source so that you can start to detect patterns for managing the city, but also allow people to develop apps to say, let you walk in a safe route between home and work. The project has since been expanded to be called SAGE, and there's now an update that's been going on. In 2018, I was out in Chicago, actually speaking at a cybersecurity conference, and had a chance to see this live because I was in touch with the project manager, and they're mounted on street poles. I've got lots of pictures, but they're not as good as this one because of the angles that I was able to take, but it's a really interesting project. There's another project that started in 2015 in Leeds in the UK, where roboticists have been starting to design robots to literally detect city defects and fix them before they become major problems. So eventually these will probably be nanobots, really teeny tiny robots. Right now they're just really small robots, and I've been in touch with the researchers since they started work on the projects. It's about self-repairing cities, and they've got flying robots that might be able to go and fix things high up, whether it be on an electricity network or changing a light bulb. Drones that will be flying above streets looking for the beginning of a pothole. Sense the pothole, another drone comes out, does the pre-work, and then a third one right now, these are already prototypes, fill in the pothole, and this is just so exciting. But oh my gosh, flip side, what if it were to get hacked? You know, good and bad all the time. So, IoT security. There was an attack a couple of years ago, or actually a code mistake in firmware or open source IoT firmware or software called GSOAP, and the developers fixed it right away, but in the meantime it got downloaded into a whole bunch of IoT devices, and there are just so many out there. As of October this year, there are about 14 million IoT devices, and depending on who you are actually looking at in terms of forecast, by 2030 there may be anywhere from 29 to over 40 billion IoT devices out there. What might happen if this was hacked? I'm going to share a short story from an author named Brian Prophet, written in 2013, and I'm going to paraphrase it very quickly. And this is about a cyber attack that takes advantage of IoT. So this is fictional, but it's possible to happen. So it takes place in somewhere in July in the future in New York City. And in the Holland Tunnel, it's about 1.5 miles long, and there are 84 massive fans that put air in and out of the system. Suddenly, the fans in the tunnel and every other tunnel going into Manhattan shut down. People start getting woozy with carbon monoxide, and of course the inevitable happens. They fall asleep, crash into walls, crash into each other, and there's massive pile-ups. People can't even get out. On the bridges and all over the roadways, suddenly all these IoT devices or sensors that are in the cars that we have today are starting to malfunction. Brakes start to fail. Accelerators start to just push down without anybody stepping on them. Cars go out of control. Massive chaos. Separately, there are attacks on data centers, on specifically the cooling centers, and no matter how much the IT technicians try to get the cooling centers back online, the cooling systems, they can't. And because there's so many servers in the data centers, they have no choice but to take it offline, or the servers just do a meltdown. This results in absolute gridlock across the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. Now, this is fictional, but if you can imagine what a cyber attack on a city might look like, this could give you a clue as to what hackers in the future or a state-based cyber attack might look like, and it could be pretty scary. So what we need are really good defenses to help us prevent this. And AI, while AI could be used for nefarious purposes, it is going to be increasingly a fundamentally important toolkit in our cyber armory, because with AI, and especially using its ability to very quickly analyze massive amounts of data for pattern detection and anomalies, we can use this to stop these kinds of attacks, and even the things that are happening today in real time. Maybe it might mean shutting systems down and raising a red alert for people like yourselves to take action and see what's really going on. And things might be chaotic for a couple of hours, and maybe it impacts your business. But wouldn't it be better to impact your business for a few hours than to have a major ransomware attack or a major data leak or some other even more nefarious type of attack happen? So one of the things that, again, I'd like you to take away from this is that you should familiarize yourself with some of the latest developments in the world of artificial intelligence. There are two other topics that I'd like to talk about briefly before closing today. And the first has to do with protecting critical infrastructure. And for me, there's almost nothing more critical than our power grid, because without our power grid, we can't do anything. We can't charge our devices, we can't pump petrol, we can't have sanitation. Like literally, our digital world stops. There's no communication, no power, no communication. It's actually been said that, we're in today's modern society, 9 meals away from utter chaos. So cyber attacks are certainly one way that critical infrastructure can be attacked. But what most people haven't thought about is that our electricity systems are also subject to some other things that you may not have thought of, like solar flares and coronal mass ejections. This is something that is scientific fact. Our sun has cycles and it emits flares and CMEs, which are a bigger version that actually include plasma. If one is headed in the direction of Earth, it will fry satellites and it will fry potentially complete electrical systems, like literally blow them up. In 1859, there was something called the Carrington event, and it took out the then telegraph systems all along the United States and in Canada. We've had CMEs and solar flares happen recently, but luckily they were not pointed in the direction of Earth. Another thing that we need to worry about, especially with today's geopolitical climate, are electromagnetic pulses, where literally a small nuke is detonated in the air above a geography, and that sends the same kind of pulse that would literally fry electronics. We need to make sure that we're hardening our grid so that if this kind of thing happens, we have the ability to survive without this. This is something that most people are not aware of, but should be. And the very last thing that I'd like to talk about is the future of humanity and whether or not we'll be taking technology into our own bodies. Well, I think we're going to be starting with smart contacts. I see that as rather innocuous, because if we don't like what's happening with smart contacts, we simply take it out. But what if we're talking about brain implants? And there's been work for at least 15 years on brain implants, mostly from a medical perspective to help people with memory and cognitive disorders, and more recently to help people who've had spinal cord injuries to walk again. How fantastic would that be? But there's also talk about using chips in our brain-machine interfaces, to be able to control maybe robotic devices or other devices, or to connect us to the World Wide Web and literally be able to think a thought and download information. Before you put a chip in your head, you've got to think about, well, what are the benefits and what are the risks? Well, if it's for a medical purpose and you're paralyzed and it might let you walk again, that would be pretty fantastic. And if you had this supercharged chip in your brain to give you all kinds of information, wow, you'd have superhuman powers. But my gosh, what if someone hacked it and made you do something that you wouldn't do ordinarily, or worse yet, hacked it to the point where you had to do a reset? How are you going to reset your brain and your memory? You're not. And there are other things in the pipeline like stem cells and bioprinting, which is really cool, where literally you can use adipose fat from your body to use to generate stem cells, and with 3D bioprinting can, in the next 10 years, maybe 20, literally design a replacement heart or a replacement liver or a replacement organ. And then we get into genetic engineering, which isn't really technology, but it's sort of verging on it. And then nanobots as well, teeny tiny robots that might go into your body to initially target specific diseases. And they're already being worked on in research labs, but eventually there'll be nanobots that are living in our bodies potentially as protective measures, swimming in there, watching out for your body, and then taking protective action. But what if something goes astray? The future of humanity, well, are we going to meld with technology? Maybe, maybe not. And if we do, we better make sure that we've got the right security in place. So I want to thank you very much for your time today and leave you with one closing thought, and that is, right now when it comes to cybersecurity, we're at war, and you are the warriors that are going to help protect us. Thank you very much, and thank you, Trend Micro, for having me.